pastor. He's also a chaplain working in the Atlanta, Georgia area. His name is Archie Jackson. Archie, thank you for joining us this hour. It's a pleasure to welcome you to America's Hope, my friend. And you are living hope. How did that come about?
Thank you so much, Brother Kelly, for having me. And one of the greatest things I hope is that when I was first born and I was living inside of the projects, and as a young man living in the projects, I said to myself, it has to be more than this. It has to be more to life than just coming out of the front door, seeing drug addicts, seeing people addicted to drugs. And it was just something in my heart that it was more than being in the projects, more than being in that environment, seeing people get shot, seeing people drink, seeing when I come out of the project always people with dope needles in their arms. And as a young kid, I used to go right next door to the University of Pittsburgh. It was right next door to our projects, and I would dig with a shovel after watching the Beverly Hillbillies, and I said, I'm going to find gold, I'm going to find hope. But in the midst of me wanting to find hope, felt like I was stuck in that environment. Stuck in that environment with no hope, stuck in that environment, the projects of everything that's going on around me. But what ended up happening, Kelly, was this that really transformed me is that my mother and I would be turning the television and I would catch some kind of preaching that I didn't know was preaching back then because I never grew up in church, never went to church my whole life, never did any of that. And so what it was is that I always said to myself, no matter what, out of 5 kids, all my older brothers and sisters quit school. All of them dropped out in 10th grade. My 2 sisters pregnant at 15. I said to myself, Mom, I'm going to graduate. I said to my father, I'm going to graduate. I'm going to make something of myself. I'm going to make you proud. So I graduated with honors, and I decided to decline on some basketball scholarship and academic scholarships, and I ended up joining the Marine Corps. And in the midst of the Marine Corps, of me joining it, I wanted to be in a place that will give me more discipline, but also travel the world and also get a check where I can help my mother, help my father, because it was like a struggle in those projects. After the Marine Corps, after boot camp, went to Okinawa, Japan. And then from Okinawa, Japan, went to Quantico, Virginia, TBS, the basic school. But all along, I thought I was joining the Marine Corps to make a difference in a career. But I was joining the Marine Corps, Kelly, just to really, really meet the Lord Jesus Christ. Because never grew up in church, never knew Jesus. Mother never took me to church. Mom drinking every week.
Wait a minute. Let me unpack that then, because you gave us a whole lot there in just the first few minutes of your discussion. So you grew up in the projects in Pittsburgh, in an area that I understand is known as the Hill District, which is can be very notorious for criminal activity, gang activity, drug activity, and as you mentioned, you saw a lot going on there in your young years, and yet you had this family dynamic going on as well. What was going on between you and your mom, and then how did you find the resolve to actually have hope that you could get out of the hood or the Hill District in Pittsburgh to go on to become a Marine?
The difference are the dynamics with my mom. Like sometime in the middle of the night, I will hide in the closet. I will hide in different areas because I know my mother would scream out and look for me when she was drunk. And she would scream out. She would say, "Where you at, boy? Where you at, boy? You think you better?" I said, "No, Mom, I don't think I'm better. I'm just trying to get better. I'm just trying to make you and Daddy proud. I'm just trying to get out." Because you're right. I grew up in the Hill District where heroin was. That's where I grew up, right in the midst of the Hill District in Robinson Court. But in the midst of my mom drinking, my mom grabbing me, and some nights told me, "Come here," grabbed me and choked me by my neck and just tell me that was saying, "You're not better than anybody." But in the midst of all of it, I would say to myself, no matter what, I'm going to make it. So I used to go down, Kelly, one thing, I used to go downstairs in the bottom of the projects, and it was a sewer system there. I would pull up that thing and go down there at age 7, 8, 9, and 10, and I'd be down there doing my homework because I needed a place of isolation. I needed a place of quietness where I can just read and I can just write and get my thoughts together. So So in the midst of my dynamics with my father, going to work, coming back home, I learned work principles to what I see my father do. But I learned something in the midst of my mother and drinking and gambling. I said to myself, one thing I will not do. I will never drink in my life. And I will never drink. I will never do drugs. So I end up not drinking. I end up never taking a drink, never taking a smoke of a cigarette, never doing any drugs. But the very thing I hated was the very thing that I became. The very thing that I hated, drugs. I became a drug kingpin. I began to poison people. I began to do it because when I lost my father at age 52, I understood something. At 52, I lost my father to cancer. At age 52, my best friend diagnosed with cancer that brought me to Atlanta died. And then the enemy reared his head up at age 52. I was diagnosed with cancer 5.5 years ago. But thanks be to God that he caused me to triumph in Christ Jesus. But he tried to make me.
Yeah, Archie, you have an incredible story that's unfolding before America's very eyes, because many people in America they don't know you. I mean, the people in Atlanta know of you because of your chaplaincy and the fact that you're working with a lot of youth in Atlanta to help them steer clear of the very things you were exposed to. But you went on to become a Marine, and you lived in a household that taught you, because of what you witnessed, that you never wanted to do drugs, never wanted to get in alcohol. This is an incredible story, and it's one, as I stated at the top of the show, about second chances. I want to take a break and come back and unpack more of your story, because it isn't unlike so many other children growing up in projects in America, in the inner cities of America, in the rural Appalachia of America. You have a story that we're all too familiar with, and that we need to unpack, because you have been able to find an answer. So let's take a break. We'll come back. We're talking to Archie Jackson. He's a chaplain.
60 to 70 million people intentionally. And we have people being like, oh, it can't happen here. Yeah, it can. And it might.
These people, they're not interested in the facts. They're not interested in anything except crushing people that are in their way.
There needs to be a formal deprogramming of the cult members.
To America's Home. So we're talking about people living in America who find second chances. And our first guest that we've been talking to is chaplain and pastor Archie Jackson, who's living in Atlanta, Georgia now. And as many of you know, if you were watching the first segment, Archie has been through it. Archie's really been through it, and you're still a young man. Let's go back to where we left off. The fact that you had gone through so much in growing up as a kid in Pittsburgh, living in the projects, and now you make it to the Marine Corps because you want to do better, and yet you were exposed to some things in the Marine Corps that, instead of becoming better, you wanted to something else that you said you'd never do: drugs and alcohol. What happened?
Yes, in the midst of in the Marine Corps, I met this Captain Andrews, which was my OIC. And Captain Andrews, in the midst of me meeting Captain Andrews, he told me, he said, Corporal Jackson, you have something different about you. It's something different. I noticed that you don't come in here smell like alcohol or anything, but at that time I was going through something over at where I was temporarily assigned with another lieutenant that was extremely the first time we ever experienced racism. And it caused me to want to lose hope, caused me to not want to ever, and I was furious that I joined the Marine Corps. But after my TV where I was over, after my 9 months to a year over there with Lieutenant Moore, I was sent back to Captain Andrews, my original base. And I began to explain to him how I felt hopeless. I felt that I never knew. I just thought people love people. Because I always understood that pain don't have no color. When pain shows up in the door, it has no color. Pain, death, and fear, anything, joy, nothing has color until it shows up at your address. So in the midst of me seeing Captain Andrews going back, he said, Mr. Jackson, you have something different about you. And he began to say, "Can you come to my house?" It's the first time that I ever talked to a enlisted soldier outside of hours. I said, "Yes, sir, I can come." Went to his house, went to his basement, met his wife, and he introduced me to a man named Jesus. He introduced me to Jesus. He took me down the thing they understood now, called the Roman Road. And I gave my life to the Lord at 1986, going into 1987. So
that's remarkable that you would meet a captain, a senior officer in the Marine Corps. You talked about going through a racial situation with one of your officers, and here this captain sees something in you, perhaps hope in you, while you were feeling hopeless, and then he introduces you to your faith. But you would think everything would be okay after that, right? But it didn't happen. What happened that turned your faith upside down and provoked you to become a drug dealer?
I get a phone call. Get a phone call from my mother, get a phone call from brothers and sisters, and said, "Your daddy been sick." And I said, "Well, okay, what's the matter with him?" And he was misdiagnosed twice. One time they said he had pneumonia, and then the second time it was TB, but his test for TB always came back positive. So in the midst of him going through that, without my family telling me that, he was going through it in 9 months. So I get home and I see my father. He is so sick. And so I talked to my dad, and I grabbed him by the hand. He was a man of, he didn't talk. He worked. He had incredible work ethics. He talked through his coveralls. He talked through his boots and his steel toes. That's how my dad spoke to us. He spoke to us working and put the check on the table. And put the check on the table to take care to feed his family. But I seen a man of strength and a man of hope whose work concept, I wanted this work concept. Well, I believe God's going to heal my father. But when I went and he took chemotherapy and radiation therapy, hope was lost. My father ended up passing away February 5th, 1988. And I can remember that day that he passed away. I was so stressed, Kelly. I went to the backyard and I said, the hope and the strength that I seen, God, you're not a God of hope. You're not a God of a second chance. You're not a God that really loves me. Because I never seen my father do anything wrong to anybody. Watched him dig people out in the snow right there in the Hill District, up that deep hill. I used to go help with him. Never seen him argue and fuss. All I seen him was drink, and my mother did all the fussing. So now I'm mad at God because I don't know God. Like I need to know him. I became so overwhelmed there. When they took him out, the morgue took him out, I went to the backyard, took my .380 gun, and I said, "God, forgive me, but I'm leaving here." And I wanted to make sure underneath the project door, underneath the project where I stayed at, I was standing there. People would hear the gunshot from the back, and they would look out the window. Took the gun, put it to my head, and then I squeezed the trigger, and it said, click. I said, "Man, this gun, what's wrong with this gun?" And then I looked at it, and I said, "Something wrong." And I put the gun up in the air, and I pulled it. Boom! And it went off. And when it went off, my mother ran to the door, window in the back, looked and said, "Boy, what you doing back there playing with that gun?" In the midst of it, of me pulling the trigger and the gun going off, I said, "Wow, the gun could have went off that shot." So I became a big drug dealer. I began to sell masses of drugs, making $1 to $2 million, $1 to $2 million a month. And in the midst of me selling that and poisoning people, I end up getting arrested. I end up right before I got out the Marine Corps. I got out the Marine Corps. They gave me an option because I got my ankle hurt and crushed. They gave me an option to take a lump sum of money to get out. And Brother Kelly, I can remember this. Racism popped his head up again. I can remember like it was yesterday that it was time for me to get out. I was selling drugs, bought a house in North Carolina. Now I'm leaving Virginia, went to North Carolina. When I came back to humanitarian transfer, me selling drugs still. And they give you an out physical to leave. But rumors was Jackson's driving 2 BMWs, he bought a house. The rumor around was that he's selling drugs around the Marine Corps. Now, take it, I never in my life used drugs, ever. When I handled it, I used gloves. When I cooked in my system. So that 3 weeks when I'm about to get out, when they offered me a lump sum to get out, I said I'm not going to sell no drugs or anything. I want to make sure I'm not around anything. So I took my outpatient, I took my outing of physical to get out the Marine Corps of urinalysis. I took it on a Tuesday. They came back Monday. They called me back in Monday because the girl I was dating got arrested on that Saturday. And I went down to get her out, and they locked me up. So they gave me a urinalysis on that Tuesday, Kelly. And then they came back Monday and said I forgot to sign the top. So I'm thinking ductus exemplo, simplified devil, always faithful. There are people of truth and integrity. So they come back and I initial it. And it comes back and says, when I'm about to get my lump sum, Jackson, you came back for positive for drugs. I said, no way, impossible. Strongest thing I ever had in my system was a Pepsi Cola. No way, it's impossible. So in the midst of that, Kelly, I ended up getting an attorney, and they wanted me just to sign a slip saying office hours that I used drugs. I said, no. Now you asked me if I sold it, I sold it, but I never used it in my life. I ended up going to a court martial, beating a court martial, losing one charge because I ended up getting a blood sample and a hair sample from off the base, which stay in your system for 3 to 6 months, and everything came back negative, but they still found me guilty. So it causes me now still to lose hope. And I said, God, if you send me to jail for drugs and lock me up for drugs, I'm okay. But you saying that I used it, no, I didn't use it. So I end up getting my lump sum, going out, going back to Pittsburgh, and I began to become a drug kingpin. I began to sell masses of drugs, masses and masses of drugs, having over 150 to 200 young guys work for me, making $1 to $2 million a month. And in the midst of that, something in my heart was just telling me I'm tired of this. So I end up getting caught, stand in jail for about 15 months, end up getting a bail, and in the midst of getting a bail, the spirit just kept pulling me back to God. And I went on a run from the FBI, from the charges I was arrested. And I never forget it, back in North Carolina, 5 kilos of cocaine in my room, about $2 to $3 million in the room, and my friend had got killed. I got on my knees, Kelly, and I said, Lord, I am so tired. I don't have the heart. I don't have the heart to turn myself in. But God, if you can just catch me, if you can just put these handcuffs on me, because I can't do this no more. I'm tired of running.
So, Archie, let's take a break because this is an incredible story about how you saw so much in your young life, and now you're a drug kingpin, and the very thing you were trying to stand up against, you have now become. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll find out what ultimately led you to find the hope that was elusive and the peace that is around you now, and how you're helping so many other people avoid this kind of life. We're back in a moment with Archie Jackson here on America's Hope. Hope tonight we're watching a man's life. As we've talked about, America is a place of second chances. And we're talking to chaplain and pastor Archie Jackson. How he got there is an incredible journey of the ups and downs that many of us experience in life. And Archie, as I understand it, you were trying to avoid drugs just because of circumstances in your life. You were brought into the drug life. And it happens to so many young Americans. So basically, you're making $1 to $2 million a year in the drug life. You're a drug kingpin. You're employing at least 100 to 150 kids helping you do the trade. And now you've tasted prison life. You've been you got on an honorable discharge in the Marine Corps, even going through a court martial situation. I'm sitting here thinking, how does this happen to one man? And what was the breaking point that finally said, Archie, you can do better. You must do better. Otherwise, you're going to self-destruct and destroy a whole lot of people, as you promised God you would do.
What ended up my breaking point was I had a great friend that died. He ended up dying, and I couldn't go to the funeral. And I was all the whole time of me selling drugs. I would pray before I dropped the drugs off and ask God to protect me. That's how lost I was. I would pray, and I would get 30, 40 kilos a week, and I was just making tons of money, about $1 million a month. But my breaking point was I got on my knees. I said, God, I am so tired of this. If you just catch me, because I don't have the heart to turn myself, and God, please catch me. And what happened was, when I left that hotel room, I was in handcuffs in 2 minutes. Now, take it while I'm on the run, I have a different name, William Wilson. I end up a different name. I was under a different name and an alias. Went to the graveyard, got a new identity while I was on the run. So they end up arresting me and taking me to Hancock County Jail. In the midst of going to Hancock County Jail, I went to Burgard Penitentiary. Burgard Penitentiary, I was so hungry in the county jail before I even served the state charges because they caught me with drugs on me. I was so fired up in Jesus, and I was so happy, and I had peace that I was not running anymore. I had peace that I was locked up. I was so glad to be locked up. And I was saying to myself, this arrest saved me from myself. So I went to Burgard Penitentiary. I was so on fire for God, leading people to Jesus, and ended up getting released from state penitentiary to go to the federal penitentiary after staying here a year. But in prison, of me being hungry for God, living a life of fasting, God would show me things and make himself so real. He'll give me a word of knowledge where I seen a guy stab a guy.
So let me get in here then, because some people would not understand what you're talking about from a faith perspective. In general terms, then, you get arrested, you're happy about the whole thing because it's keeping you from the drug life.
Yes.
And so because you're now at peace with yourself and isolating yourself from the drugs, you're now getting connected to your faith in God, and now you're spreading this good news message in a bad news environment. Did hope begin to rekindle in you, and you could see yourself one day perhaps getting out of prison to do better and be better?
Yes. Once I got arrested, when one thing about isolation and being arrested was isolation gives you a chance to think. Just like the prodigal son that said he came to himself. And when I was arrested, I began to reevaluate my life and begin to say, wow, my father would be so disappointed in me. My father would never believe I would ever have sold drugs. My father would be so disappointed. He told me to look after my mother because I'm the one that always looked out after her. He would be so disappointed. And that kindled hope in me that this is not the life. This is not me. And God began to say, Archie, I'm going to change your fingerprint. I'm going to change your name. And that just gave me hope. It just gave me strength and faith just to get in the Word of God, study the Word of God. And I studied, I got in the Word. I got paroled from the state penitentiary, and they sent me over to serve my federal time and end up getting federal time. And what changed my life, it was an encounter with an ex-congressman that was serving time in Atlanta. Ex-congressman serving time. 3 guys was plotting to kill him, and he was coming back and forth with me to the chapel, and we were studying. He began to tell me a story and cry. I began to pray with him, and a couple guys that was talking about hurting him and killing him. I was like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. I mean, and I didn't know him because I'm not from Atlanta. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he was from Atlanta. So I ended up saying, no, you can't do that to him. You can't do it. And so they ended up backing off. And I can remember, he said, if you ever get out of prison and ever need help, I'll help you. So I said, no problem. So me serving time, Kelly, I got about 6 months left. They called me to R&D, receiving and shipping, and I'm thinking I'm about to go home early. Unbeknown, I got a 7-count indictment with the state, 7-count indictment with the feds. The drug kingpin that I was working for, I was the second in charge, ended up getting arrested. And they end up re-indicting me. and I ended up going back through the process before I'm being released from prison. I was sent back to West Virginia, where I experienced extreme racism, them spitting in food, and in the midst, they put me over in an area, and I began to pray in the area and tell the guy about his mother that she's going to live, and he didn't believe it. But he wouldn't hold my hand because he never touched an African American's hand. He slammed my hand down from the cell. But we ended up praying together, and he got that phone call like God told me the next morning. His mother coming off of life support, and that whole block of everybody that never seen people begin to touch my skin in Moundsville, West Virginia, Kelly, but they never seen a black person in person touch me, and that whole block I led to Jesus. So in the midst of the racism that I experienced in the military that ended up getting in me, God sent me to Moundsville to get that racism out of me. So
how does all this end? I mean, how much time did you spend in prison in total? And what, when you finally got out, what did you start doing on the streets of Atlanta?
Okay, when I got out, I did 7 years. I got out of prison, went back home, went back to Pittsburgh because they wouldn't let me parole to Pittsburgh. I came back to Atlanta. I ended up calling the ex-congressman, and in the midst of calling the ex-congressman, he gave me an opportunity. We opened up a furniture store together. From opening up a furniture store, I ended up keeping his books at a discount mall. And in the midst of me opening up a discount mall, I ended up opening up my own discount mall. And I said, every person that I hire will be ex-felons. Anybody that came out of prison, I will give them a space in my mall. I dedicated 30 to 40 spaces to ex-felons getting out, trying to teach them entrepreneurship. So I began to teach entrepreneurship, teach them, help them get their LLC or their S corps, and gave them opportunities. And in the midst of the opportunities, I ended up opening up a skating rink, ended up going into all of the alternative schools. And that's where I came back with the ministry Snatch Back, snatching one kid back at a time, snatching them out of the hand of the enemy, and just teaching them who they were. And the ministry I do now is Snatch Back Ministry, where I try to teach the kids that you have to change 4 things in your life. You have to change your environment, you have to change your language, you have to change your diet, and eventually God will change your name. So I end up going into different alternative schools, end up going to different colleges, doing ATF First Strike with Ron Luce back in the day. And I end up just preaching the gospel of hope to tell these kids that you are not who the devil said that you are. You can change your life. And my main story I tell them is this. You don't have to go to prison. I went to prison for you. You don't have to sell drugs. I sold drugs for you. You just got to find out who you really are. And that's what I do here in Atlanta. I do Snatchback Ministry. I go also with Dr. Bugs. I've been to Miles College, TSU. I done spoke to several colleges, several high schools to give people hope.
Based on everything that you talked to us tonight about, Archie, it sounds to me like you are now trying to help people have a second chance, regardless of what political affiliation they have, what color they might be, what religion they might be in. You're trying to provide them with a second chance, especially the youth right there in the inner city of Atlanta. To me, that is so important because we hear stories about crime, mass shootings, and drugs, but we never get to talk and hear stories from ex-drug kingpins like yourself and the story of transformation that you've experienced and how you're now out there. I mean, you could have gone and retired somewhere. Instead, you're back out there learning how to teach people business, learning how to teach them hope. What's your message to America about hope?
So my message to America is the people that's in prison, the people that made mistakes, eventually they're going to be your neighbor. Eventually, you're going to have to help them process their pain. And that's the message that I give to America. Give somebody a chance. Snatch them back. Pull them out of the fire, even hating them garments that are spotted by it. But when hope is deferred, the heart is made sick. But when the answer comes, it's like the crown of life. That's what I would just give America.
Archie Jackson, final question. You and your mom, restoration?
Restoration. Me and my mom, she stopped drinking. I have a prayer line on Wednesday, Bible study on Thursday. My mother's the #1 cheerleader on it. And I told my mother, I'm sorry for doing time because you didn't raise me that way. Incredible restoration with my mother, the love and the compassion that I can show her, that you do have somebody that really loves God, that really can show the rest of this generation hope.
Archie, I appreciate you coming on to be so transparent with your story. It's your story, one that I think many people watching this will sit back and ponder and yet have to respect exactly all that you've gone through. I just love your transparency and your ability to be vulnerable and share this incredible journey that you've had. I wish you nothing but the best, and thank you for sharing your hope in America, in God, in you, in your family, and in restoring and helping the youth of America see that there's a better way. Archie Jackson, thanks for being a guest on America's Hope.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelly.
It's an incredible story, everyone. If you want to check them out, make sure you look for Snatchback Ministries. Archie Jackson.